Fell in love in the key of C. And we walked along. Welcome to episode 2 of the podcast, which doesn't at this point have a name. I figure under the theory of minimum viable product, let's get a podcast out there quick, get some comments from you guys, and we'll go from there, and we'll add a name when a name becomes necessary. I don't think it is quite yet, so here we are, the No Name Podcast. Maybe somebody can make me a logo for that. So in episode 1, kind of what we talked about was a journey and a song. Going to Amsterdam, not really having the experience I wanted there. Kind of talked about my life in Florida and not really being what I want it to be here. How attending a Lucy Rose concert and a story and a song may have sparked a change. We'll have to see. So this is part 2 on that journey. And before we get far into this, I want to kind of talk about Amsterdam a little bit more. My friends who I went there had scheduled to go a trip with. In no way, shape, or form is any of this on them. Whatever they were feeling is legitimate, and the choices they made are the best choices they knew to make at the time. And this isn't about them. They did what they needed to do. I'm 100% behind that. It just so happens that the particular circumstances caused me to ask some questions and take a hard look at where I've been and where I might be going and what I could or should be doing. But then the real question becomes, you have this experience in Amsterdam, and all of a sudden you find yourself on a plane coming back home, back to the same old, and then what? It's said that wisdom is found in that moment when all you have counted on is lost. I know it's counterintuitive, but then a lot of the things that I believe about life are counterintuitive. Strength being found in those moments of weakness. I believe that life is a metaphor. It's a riddle more than it is a statement. You have this life-changing experience, and you're on this high, and then you come back, and how do you keep that going? Before I talk about that, and before I get into the next phase of what happened, I want to take a little kind of a side trip and talk about coffee and intention. I went for a good 20 years without drinking caffeine. I guess I really just started up in the last year and a half, 2 years again. And, I've had a lot of difficulty sleeping in my life. Caffeine was just one of those things I did not need. So when I picked it back up, the coffee was more about the creamer. It was more about the experience, the hanging out with people in the break room and drinking coffee and talking than it was about the coffee itself. But as you find as I go along and as I travel more, you see me get closer to the basics of what's going on. And part of what happens on vacation, for me at least, is I walk a lot, right? Like I will walk 2.5 miles to dinner and back just because I can. It's not unheard of for me to make it to 40,000 steps in a day on vacation. And, that would be unheard of to do that here. But you see so much more when you're walking than when you're driving in a car. You stop in shops, you meet people, you talk to people, you have conversations. And it's just so much more a brilliant way to travel than by car. So I'm happy to go on foot. And, what you see is while I'm doing that, while I'm traveling more, I'm changing the way I drink coffee as well. I'm cutting out the excess in favor of the essential and being more intentional about making choices and being in the moment and being aware and being part of what's going on. I first go to drinking cappuccinos and flat whites, and I found this great coffee store. I think one of my friends pointed it out to me, actually, Bandit Coffee over on Central Avenue in St. Petersburg. And so, try to go to there, every weekend or every other weekend and get there, because they have 2 different espresso roasts. So you actually have a choice. And a lot of times I'll actually wind up with both of them. And I guess at some point I realized that just like sour is a taste, and I love sour as a taste. People will look at me cockeyed when I drink a sour beer, because I just think it's weird. But, just as much as sour is a taste, that bitter is also a taste, right? And so I stopped putting anything in my coffee, which, if you'd known me years ago, you would think is the most bizarre thing ever, right? Just drinking straight espresso. This just would be unheard of. But I acquired a taste for it. Just like dark beers or just like wine, you can have different flavors and roasts and regions, and the complexity of an espresso can be amazing. And you only get there by eliminating the excess. And not only that, you're eliminating the empty calories at the same time. And so there's really something to be said about travel and slowing down and taking each moment at a time. And in the wake of Amsterdam, that's what I try to start focusing on more. And luckily enough, it's only about 6 weeks before I have a flight to Dublin. And goodness me, going to Ireland was everything that Amsterdam wasn't. And I loved it, and I got off the beaten path, and I drove on 2-lane roads. And there's gonna be another podcast at some point about interstate travel in this country, and how it's just soulless and such a rush to get from one place to another that it sucks all the life out of the journey. And life isn't about the destinations. It's not about beginning and endings. It's about the journey. And we just do travel wrong in a lot of ways because of the interstate system. You don't go through towns, you don't see anything, you don't take part of anything. Anyway, that's a different podcast. This is about, walking 2.5 miles to dinner in Dublin, and the weather being wonderful, and it being everything that Amsterdam wasn't. And so focusing on that intentionality, when I come back here, coming back home is always so hard for me, partially because of the things I mentioned in the previous podcast, that my life here isn't what I want it to be. But the other part is I have always struggled with working, for a living. Maybe it's part of growing up and being really sick as a kid, and just being constantly aware of the passage of time. So there was an anti-drug commercial from years ago, and all it is a character looking in the mirror and talking about having to work harder so we can make more money, so we can do more coke, so we can work harder, so we can make money, so we can do more coke, so we can work harder, and on and on and on. And that's the anti-drug commercial, right? Isn't that kind of how work is? Isn't that kind of how we live? Where we keep going and working harder so we can make more money, so we can acquire more stuff. And is there purpose in that? Is that where you find meaning? Where does that end? How do you win? I don't know, maybe years ago when people worked for companies for life, and companies handed out pensions, and you were working towards something, you were working towards a future, maybe that made sense, but does it make sense now? I mean, what if we didn't have so much stuff, and we didn't need so much money, and we didn't need to work harder? As it goes towards Memorial Day, I'm asking, what if a lot more? And there's nothing like a 3-day weekend to shake things up and get things out of the routine. That we do have routines, and as human beings, we do fall into patterns. And so it's good to have that 3-day weekend and stay in town every once in a while, because it really presents you with some different opportunities. And so on this particular weekend, I was sitting around here and I decided, let's put on Netflix and let's watch a documentary. So let's pick this documentary on minimalism. And boy, howdy, does that hit home. And I'm not going to sit here and try to sell you on minimalism or on meditation, which I've done a lot but hadn't done in a long time up till that Memorial Day weekend. But, when you ask what if, and what happens if we slow down and we live more meaningfully, and what if we eliminate the clutter that takes up so much space in our lives, will what is left have more meaning? And this documentary, I was just at the right place at the right time, I guess. It really spoke to me also. And I'll link to the documentary and their website so you guys can check that out. But what I heard when I watched that documentary was get back to basics, be more intentional. The same things I talk about at the beginning of the podcast, go back to those things like meditation that you don't think that you have time for, but it's those things that you don't think you have time for are the ones you have to make time for. Don't worry about what comes next after Amsterdam or after Ireland. Just be open to anything. So I am. And so later that day, I decide to do an experiment because, my background is biochemistry and I like to make hypotheses and test them out, just kind of weird like that. And so I decide to experiment with a ketosis diet. Are all calories really equal? Are carbohydrate calories equal to fat calories equal to protein calories? And so I changed my diet and decided to eliminate carbs. And I don't know whether I ever figured out whether calories are equal or not, but what I found out later was that I was eating a whole lot fewer calories by not eating carbs, and that led to weight loss. And so a common theme to these podcasts, at least the early ones, till I get to get up to speed on where I am, is going to be timing and intentionality and being open to things and just the coincidences that happen. Because I start meditating, and the Tuesday before going back to work after Memorial Day, I'm listening to a talk by Jon Kabat-Zinn about meditation. It's an old one he gave to folks at Google some years ago, and towards the end of it, he reads a poem, and so I'm going to read that to you right now, and I'll link to it also. It's called Love After Love by Derek Walcott.
The time will come when, with elation, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, "Sit here, eat." You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit, feast on your life.
And I heard that, and it just clicked to my head that there's someone on Facebook that I went to high school with that, has been going through a lot of changes in her life, and it just totally made sense to send this to her. And so just out of the blue, this is someone I hadn't really talked to in 20, 25 years, just sent it to her. And, who can say why something like that happens? Just being open to anything and going with it when that voice whispers do something. That's what I'm doing, as much as I can, is listening for that voice inside, slowing down, living with intention, and being able to hear that more clearly. And so after that, I get in the car and I'm on my way to work, and I decide to listen to one of the minimalist podcasts. So they have a website and then they do podcasts. I think it may be every week that they do them. And so there are about 60 podcasts in the list, right? And so I head off towards kind of the beginning. Don't really know where to start, but I see one, it's podcast number 5. It's called Priorities. And so one of these things that I talk about a lot, in work and life is priority. Do one thing at a time, get it done before moving on to the next one. If you know how much I love Scrum, you'll know that about me. Do one thing at a time. Don't multitask. You're just wasting time if you try to multitask. And so I picked the one called Priorities. And so this podcast is back from before, about a year and a half ago, back before they released the documentary, right? And so at the beginning of the podcast, they are giving some personal updates before they get into the minimalism. And they start talking about having just gotten back from St. Petersburg, where they opened up a coffee shop. And the coffee shop is called Bandit Coffee. And I just have a total what the fuck moment, because that's the place that I love to go get coffee in St. Pete. And I'm driving to work and there are tears running down my cheek, and honestly don't know what to think. And that's where I'm going to end this. So I'll just say what I said at the beginning. The quote, "Wisdom is found in that moment when all you have counted on is lost." And so the next podcast will be about going back to Memphis for the first time in 3 years and what happens then. I thank you for listening. I hope you'll continue to listen. If you have comments, questions, suggestions, please offer them up. This is only the second time I've ever done this, so I'm sure it can be a lot better with your help and your suggestions. So again, thank you for making it this far, and I'll see you on the other side.